We call it the hydrogen oxygen pressure battery, the HOP battery, because it takes that power and it splits the water into hydrogen and oxygen, and then that goes into the combustion engine, get your returns. The motor doesn't have to create the electricity. You don't have to have some solar panels or a battery or anything like that in the mix. So that's, people are asking, like, where does the energy come from? How does this work?
And good afternoon, everyone. Tom Ross is back with me today. This is part 3 of our talk about the future of hydrogen, how it's going to be implemented through the society, where the adoption is going to occur first, and how this will actually change what we understand as energy usage, energy infrastructure, and with the Great Reset in play right now, this new information for the future, not the garbage that Musk is throwing out and all this stuff, but real usable, because very few people are going to be flying up to the moon with Branson's whatever space tourism. That's for people with money, and that might be something, but just the average general person is more interested in the real future, where the real changes are going to happen on the ground that will affect their lives in many ways. So, talking about hydrogen, we've been hearing about it more and more. So to have somebody present it that's knowledgeable, industry expert, understands where the changes are going, how they're going to manifest, and then how it can be utilized across society to change the society. Cryptocurrency is part of this, but we're going to be moving to new energy systems. And, we can talk about disclosure and the electrogravitics and magnetic motors that are all part of that too. That's in that drop from, I believe it was the CIA. There was 10,000 documents out of those 2 million that we're talking about. Energy devices using the Earth's magnetic field. But it's really going to be more in practice, something that we're used to. On-demand hydrogen is where it's going. Tom right here from tesnic.com. And I will link everything in the description box below from the previous talks we've had, so you can follow how this is expanding. And every time we have a talk, they've had great leaps forward in terms of approach by governments, private industry, saying, hey, what's this hydrogen on-demand technology, and the implementation from proof into production. And this is where we sit today. And even if you do go back about a year ago to our first initial talk, maybe it's been about a year and 3 months, but the great leaps forward, the gigantic kangaroo jumps of adoption in the mind of people realizing that it's real finally. It's not just something on a paper. It's not just theoretical. It's real, it's usable, and it's in our fingers right now. So, Tom, I appreciate you joining me again. Wherever you'd like to start with it, I was trying to phrase it that as our third talk, but maybe it's the first time anybody has listened to this. So tell us where we sit today with the progress since last time with the Canadian firms you were talking to, also with the NGOs trying to get established in Africa, as well as Costa Rica, and that whole blend of moving to societies first that don't have the energy infrastructure that we do. Instead of trying to install antiquated infrastructure that's going the way of the dinosaur anyway with the Great Reset, you're just jumping right ahead to the hydrogen economy and cryptocurrency in places. That giant leap between continents as well. So give us an update on what's been happening.
Sure. And thanks for having me on. And thanks for all your listeners to going back and forth with us. Really appreciate this and this opportunity to share with people. Especially these days, good news is a little rare, hard to find these days. Yeah, for us, we're trying to relate to the market as best as possible, and the new things that have come up, a hydrogen converter and a hydrogen oxygen pressure battery, or a HOP battery. The biggest challenges that are out there today is that most people want to get from here to there, and they know where there is, but they don't know where here is. And here is something that's a bit of a challenge in the market. If you go to a car dealership, it's like, where'd all the cars go? And if you do order one, how long is it going to take? And wow, how much does it cost? What's going on here? Just like your show says, is having all these challenges. And it's going to get worse before it gets better. So for us, what's happened is that there's a chipset shortage that's making it so that it's hard to get a lot of different things in the world, including vehicles, including electric vehicles, hydrogen vehicles, because you need MOSFETs to be able to run for controllers for electric motors. And you need them to run ICE, internal combustion engines. What do we drive today? What goes in your vehicle? And how do you get electricity? Where does that come from? There's a lot of technical stuff, but my 8-year-old was really good at helping me with this. She just simply said, "What is oil?" I said, "Well, it comes out of the ground. It's a hydrocarbon." She goes, "What is it's a hydrocarbon?" I said, "Well, hydro stands for short form for hydrogen." She goes, "Oh, well, who's the biggest user in the world for hydrogen?" It's the oil industry. Why? Because they use it to process the oil into gas, diesel, plastic, and so on. Oh, okay. So do we drive a hydrogen vehicle now? I said, yeah, technically we do. We do drive a hydrogen vehicle today. That's true. And what about electricity? Where does it come from? I said, well, they burn hydrocarbons or, in some cases, nuclear or water, wind, solar. And there's a lot of hydrocarbons that are used in the process of making those things and getting these things to work, or being burnt to be able to make heat, to be able to turn water into steam, which turns a turbine, which makes electricity. And water is H2O, and H2, that's hydrogen times two. Huh. So our electricity and our existing vehicles, surprise, surprise, you probably didn't know. You're driving a hydrogen vehicle today. When you turn on your electricity, turn on your lights today, that's hydrogen. The challenge is the stuff that comes out of the ground is not that clean, and refining it costs money. So when it goes into your vehicle, it doesn't burn all the fuel, and then the stuff comes out your tailpipe. And there's something in between called a catalytic converter that's about, a lot of people are hearing about this being stolen these days because they have rare earth materials. At worst case scenario, you could steal one and get it, go to a wrecker and get $500. Best case scenario, take it off a luxury vehicle and get $5,000. That's what it costs to replace these things. And what they are is just this honeycomb thing that looks like a small muffler. And then when the stuff goes through from the exhaust, what happens is that it interacts with the stuff that's in there and heats it up really, really hot to burn a lot of the stuff that didn't get burnt in the combustion process. So what we really do is we turn low octane fuel into high octane fuel on the fly in the motor by having hydrogen oxygen that we produce on demand in a small box that goes in your car with no modifications to your vehicle. And it goes into the air intake. And then you can take your catalytic converter off or bypass it now and get a 35% increase in horsepower, torque, and reduction in fuel costs. Your engine lasts longer and less oil changes and spark plugs and stuff because it doesn't carbon up. So really what we're doing is we're actually refining the fuel by adding more hydrogen, more oxygen to it so that it burns cleaner at a cooler temperature in the vehicle. So what this means is, to drill it down, where we are today, we're dealing with people for fleets because we want to find that sweet spot, the 10x, 10 times reduction, so we can get a really good return, get huge adoption, and make our way into the market to lower the cost and manufacture the stuff. So we don't use MOSFETs, we use transistors. So we're safe, we're fine for being able to produce this stuff for our controller, where everybody else is having huge lead time issues and cost issues, where a chipset that was $4 is now $40 if you can get it. That's where MOSFETs are today. So for us right now, the sweet spot is, we call it reefer madness. It's a reefer. The reefer is simply a thing that goes on a transport truck that makes the stuff inside of it stays cooler as refrigerated like ice. So the reefer, because it's a generator, it stays at somewhat the same RPM all the time, which is the best for us because we can reduce the fuel consumption by 50% because it's staying at one constant RPM, which is more efficient for us. They're diesel motors, which is great. The cool part is we can take lazy oils like bunker fuel, just above bunker fuel type stuff. So there's different grades of fuel that the marine industry uses, and there's heating oil and stuff and so on, stuff that wouldn't normally run in your vehicle. But because we're doing the same thing on the fly as what you do at a refinery, we put the hydrogen oxygen, it's a thing called cracking is what it's called, and being able to pull apart the bonds and make this stuff work to make it into an efficient fuel. So anyway, the bottom line is we put this device on the air conditioning unit, I guess you'd want to call it, type stuff that makes the cool air that refreezes stuff or keeps it cold. And what happens is that we can put fuel in there, and this is the wow factor. So normally you would be paying $4 a gallon, and that includes road tax, and that also includes carbon tax. And the reason we're talking about this today is the fuel prices are going up and the carbon taxes are going on. So where we are in Canada here and in Costa Rica, you're looking at a 35% increase in just the last 6 months. And it looks like it's, people are talking about crazy numbers like $200 a barrel. Carbon taxes are being applied over the next 5, 6, 8, 10 years, depending on where you live today. So when we inject this in, it reduces the emissions enough so you don't have to have a catalytic converter, so you can get rid of that cost in the vehicle. And you can also burn very lazy oils that are 1/4 the cost or less. So instead of $4 a gallon, you're down to $1 a gallon. So say like marine fuel that they put in the ships and stuff like that. If you stop there, that's a good value proposition. You come to somebody and say, look, everything's being refrigerated on a container or a transmodal or a truck or a train or whatever in those containers. As we know, it's taking longer for your New Zealand lamb to be able to get to the United States, and it's frozen. So if it's taking longer, that's a problem. Longer time, fuel prices going up, all these issues, sitting on docks longer, blah, blah, blah. 1/4 is pretty good, but because we're using hydrogen oxygen and putting it in there, it reduces the consumption by 50%. But then there's another piece to this that makes it 10x, which is the motor itself. Instead of being for like 2,000, 3,000, 5,000 hours, depending on the unit, it'll now go 20 to 30% longer because it's running at a lower temperature and doesn't carbon up because it's burning cleaner. So you need less maintenance and the engine lasts longer. So when you amortize it, the return on investment, the total cost of ownership, you're looking at a 10x reduction. So a 10x reduction on fuel, instead of spending maybe for a small fleet, $10,000 a month, now you're spending $1,000. That's incredible in an industry that has very thin margin.
Let me ask you, Tom, do you think that companies that are running containers across the ocean would actually drop costs on that? Or do you still think they're going to continue to charge these exorbitant rates, which we're seeing right now that are just pinning the global supply chains to the ground?
That's a good question. And we've really wrestled with this. At the end of the day, what we've done is in Costa Rica, we've invested in building our own fleet of vehicles so we can take on the contracts and buying into existing companies so that we can do this ourselves. The answer is yes, it can and will be passed on. And why? So we can get more contracts and, be the Amazon or Uber of the market, so to speak, because they're all based on what? They're based on crazy valuation for reducing the cost per mile by many X because of driverless cars, which does not exist today. And who knows when it's going to exist. And it requires a new vehicle, which good luck getting new ones today. Good luck getting the chipsets. So we're looking at what we can do today with the technology that we have right now with a 10x. The next piece is that we're also, the trailer, we're putting hub motors in there. So it's a fancy word for putting pie-shaped electric motors. You take the wheel off and you put it in between where the wheel used to go and when you bolt it back on and where the braking system is. And it goes on. The magic of what we're doing is that we can do 80% regen. Most vehicles can only do 5, 10% because the batteries themselves do not have the ability within seconds to take in an awful lot of energy. It's a huge amount of energy, especially if you've got a load of ice on there and it's an 18-wheeler, it's a hot day, it's going downhill. The regenerative braking, because the biggest issue for making hydrogen is the amount of electricity that's required, because it's pretty much a dead short for the controller to do that. We call it the hydrogen oxygen pressure battery, the HOP battery, because it takes that power and it splits the water into hydrogen and oxygen, and then that goes into the combustion engine, get your returns. The motor doesn't have to create the electricity. You don't have to have some solar panels or a battery or anything like that in the mix. So that's, people are asking, like, where does the energy come from? How does this work? So right now, investors and team players we're working with, like, we were surprised. We showed this to some companies and they said, look, we would love to get new vehicles if we could and if we had the capital, but passing on 30 to 40% in the last 6 months to customers is a challenge. And we're like, yep, they're happy to be able to take some equity in our company instead of cash to be able to be partners, to be able to own 51% or more of their company because of this differentiator that makes it so we can get on, get more contracts, make more profits, in a huge way. That's where we are today. The second part is the electric motors. We can turn it into like a giant Prius, a hybrid. So the trailer itself, we can literally use the electricity that's being generated to be able to actually get the vehicle up to speed because it has lots of torque. Like a train is a hybrid. So they use diesel that they burn, that they turn a generator, make electricity, and then they use the torque. It's a more efficient use of the fuel type stuff.
So let me ask you, carbon taxes. I've done a fair few videos about carbon taxes and the future of that moving forward, especially with NFTs right now, where you can create and tokenize any asset whatsoever. So people are coming out now and starting to tokenize forests. And with that tokenized forest, you know exactly how many hectares or acres you have, what the carbon offset would be for that amount of land, and then registering it with carbon brokerages that then pay you with your cryptocurrency back in the whole loop, where then you can take that crypto and either take it out in fiat or you could swap it over to something different. But this carbon tax, walk me through this a little bit with the hydrogen and the carbon tax, the credits associated with that, because right now, even with, this is in the UK, the Blair Foundation was saying, well, even though we're going to be going away from petrol, fossil fuel driven cars, you're still going to need to pay road taxes and taxes on your vehicle, because we wouldn't be able to collect that. We usually collect it in fuel taxes. We're not going to be able to collect that any longer. So there has to be an offset somewhere, and the funds need to, well, still be paid. So hydrogen, such a clean burning fuel, there should be some offset for that. But then with the vehicles themselves, or the switch in the economy from something that emits to something that doesn't emit, where does that take us in terms of these carbon credits? You know, because the forest is easy. Like you put out a non-fungible token, or you put up something, a tokenized asset that's digitized for ownership, and it goes through that whole ecosystem of verifying the amount of carbon, who's buying it, who's got the contracts for it, who gets the offset sent back to which company based on the amount of acres on your forest. That's super easy to understand. That streamlined, making money out of nothing except digitizing your trees. But when it comes to real world applications, like, all right, I'm going off fossil fuel, and you know what? Hell, I'm not electric. That's a waste too. I'm going straight to hydrogen. Then where does that take us?
Where it takes us is we're starting with generators right now because they're exempt in the places that we're working, like in Costa Rica, from road tax and carbon taxes right now. So that's an advantage. But when we get to hydrogen for vehicles, just like you said, you know, there was a short time there where a lot of companies, taxi companies and stuff and so on, natural gas and propane conversions on their vehicles. And then one day the prices went up and road tax was put on. The big question mark is, you know, for Tesla and, you know, hydrogen cars, whatever comes in the future, when they add carbon tax and you're using a rapid charger, you're well above the price of fuel even today. How's that going to work? You know, someday it's going to happen. There's like, it's inevitable, like you said. So with us, what we're hoping for is to literally end up in a courtroom and go, look, this is a much better thing than a catalytic converter, which requires rare earth materials. It's much more effective at reducing the emissions by 80%. You can get down to the point where the emissions coming out of it from, you know, cradle to grave is the same as a Tesla or electric car, because their carbon footprint's so much larger. So it takes 2 or 3 years for it to catch up, depending on how clean your energy is where you are. But what they don't tell you, of course, is that when they go to dispose of this thing, that's the big question mark. What's going to be the environmental and the cost to the community on that one? That's the part nobody seems to factor in on this. Where what we're doing is we're splitting water into hydrogen and oxygen. So it's pressure. The potential energy is just simply a pressurized gas. It's not rare earth materials with huge processing requirements. We're using no rare earth materials whatsoever. We hope someday actually we plan to be in a courtroom where they go, you have to put a catalytic converter on. We go, well, I thought this was about emissions, and I thought about carbon and carbon taxes. So let's just put a thing on it and find out, oh, wow, this reduces the emissions a lot more. And the fuel efficiency is 35% better, 30 to 50% better. Oh, so we would love to be in a courtroom where that is exposed. And I'm sure that's where it's going to go.
Tom, let me stop you for a second here. We're talking about emissions. So I know it sounds simple, but when you're burning hydrogen, what's your emission?
The emission is water. You're still going to have some particulates because you're not going to get a complete burn, but it is way cleaner, way cleaner than you would normally have with just a catalytic converter. So no matter what the fuel is, it does a complete burn. So it burns the droplet from the inside out. So it's an implosion instead of an explosion. So this just makes it so much cleaner.